Welcome to the Dental Decoders podcast. I'm your host, Brittany Rogars, and I'm here to help you crack the code on all things dental operations. Each week, we dive into topics to help you overcome roadblocks, streamline operations, and reduce team burnout. Whether you're an owner, a practice manager, or a team member, this podcast is for you. Join us for insightful discussions, engaging interviews, and practical tips. So sit back and relax as we crack the code on all things dental operations together. Hello, Decoders, and welcome to this week's episode where we are so fortunate to have Colleen Huff with us today, who is going to blow all of your minds. So buckle up and get ready for this awesome show. Welcome to the episode.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I'm so glad to have you here. I'm so glad that you and Rebecca were able to coordinate and make this happen. It's going to be such a great show. For our listeners who maybe aren't familiar with who you are and what you do, you want to start by giving us just a little bit of background?
Sure. So my name is Colleen Huff. I call myself the dental insurance coach. I have been in the field as of, I think this week, 30 years. I started at MetLife. I say the MetLife of 30 years ago, not today. Caveat with that. In the customer service, I learned dental in a classroom setting, which is unusual. And in that was given some knowledge and information that most people don't have. A move took me to New Jersey, where I started in dental practices and learned everything else the way we all do. Here, go learn this, or they throw you to the wolves. And slowly over the years, made myself, insurance coordinator. I did bookkeeping. I did, you name it, I did it. And then moved back to Buffalo area, where I'm from, and started managing. And that's where I found ADOM and got very involved with the American Association of Dental Office Management. And in 2015, I started speaking. I decided I really wanted to branch into that and coaching. And in 2021, I stepped out of a practice completely. And I'm now full-time coaching and speaking and have a mastery course on front office rocks and just released my first book. So, and I work with practices around the country. Yeah. So it's exciting. Dental insurance is my, sweet spot. That's what I enjoy, the revenue cycle, all of what goes into making sure the doctors get paid for what they produce and the hygienists.
We're speaking the same language. Yes.
Yeah. So, which I think for a lot of people, like the whole revenue cycle can be either really frustrating or really rewarding.
Yes.
And so I love having people come on here and share their tips and tricks with people so that they can make it a rewarding job or position that they have in the practice and see it kind of almost like a game that they get to play with insurance companies. The MetLife of today and not 30 years ago.
Yeah, the MetLife 30 years ago was very different, very different. We had, the managers were right there. Everything was in the States. I could put someone on hold and bring the supervisor to the call, so it was very different.
So I want to ask more about your book because I'm super excited to be able to dig into it and get the inside of your brain a little bit. So I'm really excited to hear about it. And I'm sure our guests are too. Can you tell me a little bit more about what the book is, what it's about, and what offices can expect to learn from it?
So I called it A Mouthful of Insurance because we're taking a bite out of the insurance. It developed from my consulting. And so when I first started consulting, people call because they're having problems with insurance. And I spent 21 years managing. So when you go into a practice, I learned I couldn't turn off the manager part of myself, doesn't go away. And so I'd go in and be talking insurance and realize, hey, wait, they answered the phone wrong, or this one's answering a question wrong. And so with some of my first practices, I started addressing the issue from that first phone call all the way through the practice until you get paid. And so the book follows the insurance with the person through the practice. And so I set up the book to talk about what each area's responsibility is. And we all know that clinical teams think they don't need to learn insurance and they leave it all to the administrative. But the big change that happened was when we went to chartless, it changed the makeup of the office. It used to be the team brought the chart up front and handed it to the administrative team, and we did the codes. Well, all these offices started going chartless, and who's picking the codes? The clinical. But the clinical team doesn't really know the codes and doesn't know the changes. And so it turned into this, I saw a real disconnect happening in every practice I went into. And so started adapting my coaching to this kind of I touch on it with everybody. And so the book will take you from that first phone call and pretty much walk you through from the first phone call to the new patient part of it, to the breakdown, to the clinical team and what the doctor should know and what the assistants should know and what the hygienists need to know, and then follow through with how they bring it up to you at the front. And each and every step, I'm not saying you have to be insurance driven, but you need to be insurance knowledgeable, because a happy patient knows what they're paying. And if they get a surprise bill because the hygienist didn't pay attention to the fact that if they had waited 6 months, that Panorex would have been covered, or, oh, that crown isn't covered and we could have had the discussion before they start the work, it changes the whole makeup of their experience as well as ours. It cuts down on doctors giving discounts on something because the patient's unhappy. It cuts down on not having the right x-ray or clinical notes to get something paid. And so the book will walk you basically as that insurance and as if it's a patient visit through the entire office, from initial phone call to getting it paid, or unfortunately going to collections. But we try to avoid that. At one point it was going to be a journey, but my husband, actually, will give the credit to my husband for the name, is throwing around different ideas. And he said, it's a mouthful of insurance. And that's where it came from. So
I like that you're taking that approach in the book from everybody has to understand it, because I think some people take that approach of, well, if I don't understand, then I don't have to do it. I don't have to know. And I'm finding, at least in some of the practices that I've been in coaching, is that a lot of them just, they're lacking in staffing. Sometimes it's the front, sometimes it's the back, and they're just getting to this where they just have to, everyone has to be cross-trained. Everyone needs to understand everything. And so I like that that's kind of the way you approach it in this book, which is why I'm so excited to dig in, is for that reason. We all should understand it. We don't have to be as, like you said, deep diving into the insurance as probably the insurance coordinator in the practice is.
Right.
But we should all understand and be able to find answers to questions like, oh, can they have fluoride? We don't need the hygienist coming up to the front to ask the question. You can probably look in your PMS system and see it right there and educate yourself really quickly. So I love this approach in the book. I think it's going to be really helpful for practices. I mean, really anyone in any dental position can read this book and it will benefit them in one way or another. So
the other thing was, I found myself frustrated over the years that it's expected for the administrative team to learn all these clinical terms. But when I asked them to look up 3 or 4 things, sometimes there was such pushback. And not only just from the assistants or the hygienists, the doctors too. And so the first office I managed, I set up in the system a very systematic way of how to read where the notes went. They're in the same order all the time. And every hygienist knew how to look up, can they do a fluoride? Because also we're busy at the front and we can't keep getting interrupted. And that particular office, we ran 6 chairs, 5 chairs of hygiene, 1 doctor, on a half-hour hygiene with hygiene assistants. And so the front didn't have time to stop to breathe, let alone check in, check out, do all their other work and answer questions. So that was some of it too, is we at the administrative are expected to learn clinical terminology. And so my request is that now, because of the setup, your clinical team needs to learn some of that basic insurance. And I see offices losing out on money that they could be billing things because they didn't know it. There's a lot of new codes that, well, if you don't put it in, you're not going to get paid for it. And if they don't know about it, they can't pick it.
Right.
I would love to. So I like that perspective a lot. And I've never actually thought of that. Like, I went into dentistry not knowing what endo or perio was, because I was new to the industry and I had to learn all of that stuff, and I had to learn the tooth numbers and the surfaces.
Yeah.
But I've never seen that reverse expectation. So that's interesting. And I'm excited that you called attention to that, because I'm going to be watching for that now when I go out into my client offices. I would love to know, is there 1 or 2 common things that you're seeing when it comes to revenue cycle management and insurance that is very common to see in offices that we could talk about action items for how offices could try to fix those things?
Absolutely. The biggest thing is that the clinical notes are now necessary for the insurance companies. And so all of us that have been doing this for a long time have wonderful narratives that we spend a lot of time on. And unfortunately, they don't do us any good anymore. And a lot of offices have missed that. And so if you have team members that don't do good SOAP notes, good clinical notes, they're getting frustrated because they're not getting paid. Well, they're not getting paid because those clinical notes need to be better. And also making sure that your clinical team knows what x-rays and charting and what's necessary supportive documentation. Things like why you took an x-ray have to now be in our notes. Not just I took an x-ray. There has to be a why, or the insurance can deny it. And medical's always been that way. Dental has to change its thinking. And so that's probably one of the biggest areas I coach. Any office I go into, I do a mandatory code training with the whole team, which normally they are not real thrilled to be there to start with, and it ends usually very well. I just was with a team I went out to an office in Kansas, and we did, at the end of the code training, we played Dental Code Jeopardy, and I had more fun than you can even imagine, and they loved it. So it can be a lot of fun, but the best feedback I get is when you go in and make sure they have that training, that they know the clinical team was really engaged because they want to get paid too. They understand that the doctor has to get paid for the work. And so making sure that those clinical notes are good and that the clinical team knows what the administrative team needs to get things paid is probably the biggest pain point. The other thing that any office can do, and a lot of them will probably roll their eyes when they hear this, but read your provider manuals. I know they hate hearing that, but they're changing things on us rapidly. One of the biggest ones are the SRPs. They're changing what is payable. And so again, from a standpoint of A, getting paid, or B, having the patient understand what's not going to be paid ahead of time is crucial. And so reviewing those, looking for changes. Most insurances are similar to the ADA, that they will give you a little, almost like cliff notes of what changed at the beginning a lot of times, so you can easily find it.
Yeah, it's these quick things that keep changing and updating. From your point of view, what is the best way for offices to stay up to date on these changes to be helpful? Is there there's not a central place, I know, but how do they stay up to date on the things that keep changing?
Well, first off, and again, this is something that I usually get an eye roll or a groan from when I teach. Read the newsletters from the insurance companies that we get in your email or in the mail. They actually do put information in there we're supposed to pay attention to. And I know we're all busy. And so my recommendation has always been to every insurance coordinator, someone in the office needs to be responsible for that. And so that has to be built into your weekly schedule or monthly. I don't care how you do it. Maybe you set them all aside to read at lunch. I don't care how or when you do it. Or you set it aside to read on a Friday afternoon when it's quiet. That's a huge way. And then watching the webinars that myself, Teresa Duncan, Rick Garofalo, that we do with Vine or through ADOM, or even on our own sites. Front Office Rocks are going to be, if they're part of that, I'm starting up monthly webinars again. And we talk to each other, Teresa and I, and we keep each other, because there is so much information. Some of it even gets past us, even though this is what we're trying to do on a regular basis. There's laws that are changing in every state. I just got another email and I'm trying to dig through a bunch of laws passed this year that are changing some things for the offices. If your doctor is part of your state dental association, ask them to give you a copy of their newsletter, because they never read the insurance things that are in there, I guarantee you. And there may be something in there of a state law that's passing. I was lucky my last doctor did read those things, and then she'd hand them to me, but a lot of them don't. And so that's a good way to keep up. And also be weary of who you listen to on social media. There's a lot of people that will say, well, no, I've always done it this way. And you have to be careful of who you're hearing it from. So find those sources that you trust and stick with them.
could not agree more that social media piece is such a beautiful tool when used correctly, but it's like any superpower, like it can be used for evil. And I think it is sometimes. The amount of illegal things I've been told to do in the Facebook groups is just mind-boggling.
Well, the other thing is, and a lot of people don't know this, but I actually have to pay to be licensed to teach on the dental code. So if you teach on dental coding at all, or anything to do with coding, the ADA has a licensing for that. So make sure the people that you're following are licensed through the ADA. And the ADA is starting to pay a little closer attention to who's out there and what they're saying. But anytime I teach on coding, they get a little piece of it because I have to pay the license for it. But they also, I had to submit in my seminars for their approval to make sure that I'm not teaching something wrong. So, and that's making sure that those, pay attention to what groups they're part of. Who are they with? Where are they getting their information from? I belong to the National Association of Dental Plans, so that I can go to their conventions and I get information from them that sometimes helps. I get statistical information from them. So paying attention to who you're listening to, where do they get their continuing at? Because we do it too. We have to, or else, especially with insurance, good Lord, it changes hourly lately.
Seriously.
Feels like sometimes it's like every 5 minutes, but
yeah.
Every time you think
it's changed.
Well, and you have to recheck it. I mean, I on a regular basis will send a text message to Teresa and say, I heard this. Am I wrong? Like double checking, because there are things that change.
My Post-it note, just so you are aware, is like the most full it's ever been after a guest episode. I have so many things to look up after this, so I'm super excited to have you pouring out all your knowledge to us.
I will say that instead of a Post-it note, Brittany, I just have Colleen on my speed dial.
Yes, you do.
So be on my next.
Absolutely.
Colleen, I don't know if she'll admit it or not, but I do. When I think I know the answer, but I'm a little wavery before I'm going to say something to someone or post it somewhere, I would call Colleen. Colleen, just really fast, can you just answer a really quick question for me?
Yep.
And I will say, she is so kind and very giving of herself, and she will answer my question every time I ask one. So thank you so much for being my insurance in the back pocket, just to make sure I'm not saying something I shouldn't say.
That's okay. And that's paying it forward, because I've had Teresa and others do the same for me. I used to reach out to Roy, I've reached out to Roy Shelburne over the years, and Teresa, and now I've gotten to know Rick. Yeah. There's things that sometimes our brain, the other problem I think when you've been doing it this long is I sometimes second guess, was that from 10 years ago or yesterday? Like, okay, I want to double check I'm thinking of it right, because there have been, 30 years of doing this, the changes are a lot. And sometimes I'm afraid that I'm remembering it wrong. But I will always reach out if you want my information. My email is easiest, but if it's a quick question and you text, I'll answer if I can. We have to help each other out. I mean, this is so much information.
Yeah, I'm going to take you up on that.
Super generous with it. There is. I appreciate that you're always on top of it. Yeah. So
I think Teresa Duncan's going to block me if I don't stop asking her questions. So I'm going to start mixing it up.
You can mix it up. Go for it. Feel free.
Just call
Teresa
one week. Definitely help you.
Teresa 1 week, me the next. Teresa's out of town. I'm going to hit up Colleen. Yeah, that's fine.
Then Rick, and then somebody else. Colleen, before we wrap up our episode today, which has just been, of course, once again, filled with so many, like Brittany said, all these things she now wants to go do. Is there anything our listeners should know? How can they reach out to you if they're looking for someone maybe to come in and coach their team or something like that you've mentioned on the show today? How can they find you and reach out to you, get in contact with you? And again, I just want to throw this out there at the end. Where can they find your book?
My book is on Amazon, and it's called A Mouthful of Insurance, so it's very easy to find. You can reach me. I have a website. Again, it's really hard to find. It's ColleenHuff.com. And you can email me at Colleen@dentalinsuranccoach.com. And I have a Facebook page. I have a LinkedIn. I'm on Instagram, and I do some, I mean, I'm on Instagram and Facebook. I do technically have a TikTok, but I'm not, I will honestly say I'm not great on that one. But I've gotten better on the others. So there's a lot of ways you can find me. I'll be at ADOM this year. I'm also speaking locally at the Buffalo Niagara here in the Buffalo area. If anybody wants to come to Buffalo Niagara Falls in November, early November. So your choice of weather could be snowstorm or 70 degrees because it's been both in the last few years. And I will be, I'm trying to think of where else they can find me if they feel like traveling. Next May, I'll be at one in Connecticut. And there's a few others in there, but I'm forgetting them. I'm hoping to be in the Utah, but I haven't heard back a definite. So I got to reach out to Dr. Bozeman again. That's in January. So Utah in January for some people.
Okay.
He was like, "Oh, you can come and ski." And I'm like, "I'm not a skier, but I'll still come." It's, you know, so I'm hoping.
I was going to say that might attract some people to want to come see you because
Correct.
Park City, Snowbird, they're all right there and they're all fantastic resorts. So awesome. Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. And I know that we will make sure all those are in our show notes for our listeners. And as we wrap up this awesome conversation, we always like to ask our signature question, which is, in your career, what is your decoding moment or secret code that has allowed you to be so successful?
Stubbornness. I think not giving up and not taking no for an answer. Yes. Honestly, I like to credit it to, and I date myself, Rebecca, you'll appreciate this one. Some of it is I loved mysteries as a kid. I was a Nancy Drew reader. And so I kind of approach it as a mystery and I have to figure it out. Some people call it a puzzle. But I think that's been my key is when it gets hard or I think something isn't right, instead of giving up and walking away, I get really stubborn and I don't let it go. So one other note too, front office rocks. That's where my mastery course is. I forgot that part and I don't know how because that's the main spot to find stuff online at least.
Well, we will definitely make sure that all of that. She's just being stubborn at the end, everybody.
I am
following her own pattern. And front office rocks. The master's class is really good. So that's awesome. Well, thanks again, Colleen. It's always been amazing to have you. You know, I'm just one of your biggest fans, and I've always appreciated you as a speaker, but also as almost a personal coach. So I'm so glad you could be here with us, with Brittany, and on our podcast today. I know our listeners have definitely taken away some really good gems. So thanks for being with us today. And until next time, listeners, we'll see you then.
Thank you so much for joining us for this week's episode of Dental Decoders podcast. We hope you took away a valuable piece of information. As always, don't forget to rate, share, and subscribe to help us build our community of dental decoders. We look forward to seeing you for next week's episode.